All right, good evening, everyone. I wanted to say thank you to all of you for joining us on this call and dedicating an hour and a half tonight to join in our discussion as we explore our community's view on racism. So some housekeeping items before we kick off tonight's discussion. Clayton Speaks 2020 will include 5 panelist guests, Aaron Bennett, Peter Cloven, Lawrence Montgomery, Kim Newman, and Matt Tillman. They're a diverse representation of our Clayton community with different experiences and perspective on tonight's topic. We plan to organize 2 more discussions in the coming months that are related to this topic tonight. And then following tonight's call, we're going to share the recording for you to share with others who were not able to attend tonight. Okay? So our goal tonight is to initiate discussions around racism. Okay? We also want to look for opportunities for showing how we can be more inclusive when it comes to racism, and also provide some tools for broadening our understanding and views on racism. Okay? So why are we doing this? So shortly after the protest on Tuesday, June 2nd, and the follow-up rally on Friday, June 5th, many people voiced an overwhelming support for our Black residents here in Clayton, but they also mentioned that there was a lack of understanding of the overall racial issue here in our wonderful community. Several people suggested we should take the opportunity to engage in a larger conversation within our community. So the Clayton residents that are pictured here, okay, these wonderful people, we got together and we said, let's organize this conversation and future conversations around racism. Our hope is to affect change in a way that will influence our children and the greater community going forward. Okay. So the structure of tonight's call, questions will be presented to our panel, and these questions will also be presented to you in the form of a poll for you to answer privately. Okay. These questions are based on previous discussions that have occurred throughout our community over the last few weeks. We will share the results as they are organized and facilitate to help facilitate further discussion tonight. We encourage you to place your questions in your chat window, and please don't wait to the end of the discussion to place those questions. So throughout the call, just put your questions up there, and we have our technical facilitators that are going to be pulling those questions, and they'll share them with us, and we'll bring them into the conversation. Okay. We will do our best and present them to the panel and as well as to the rest of the audience. Okay. And remember, the chat is located on the bar below on the lower portion of your screen, and then it will pop up on the right side of your screen. So I want to make sure we point out the code of conduct tonight. This subject matter that we are discussing tonight will stir some emotion. This is a really good thing. We want to be sure that the conversation stays respectful and considerate. Apologies for the dog. Please refrain from name calling, cursing, and using any other behavior that is offensive to others. We understand that there may be some participants out there that may have a difficult time using the correct words to describe their feelings. Please be gracious and understanding. And also, any unwarranted conduct will result in removal from the discussion. We want this conversation to be a safe place and a supportive place for everyone involved. Okay. At this point, I would like the panel to introduce themselves, and we're going to go in alphabetical order. First up is Erin.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Erin Bennett. I'm born and raised in rural southern Indiana, where most everyone I knew looked like me. I graduated with my chemistry degree from Indiana State, which may be best known as Larry Bird's alma mater. I'm married to Brian, and we'll celebrate our 18th wedding anniversary next week. We have 3 girls. Morgan is 25 and a Clayton Valley grad. Skylar is 14 and will be a freshman at Clayton Valley, and Avica, who is 9 and entering 4th grade at Mount Diablo Elementary. I work in sales for a drug development laboratory, and I've been with the same company for 18 years. Our family moved to California 13 years ago, and we've been in Clayton for 8 years. You might have seen me helping out with fundraising and other events at the elementary school, or met my husband when he's helped coach track or cross country. Now to Peter for an introduction.
Thanks, Erin. My name is Peter Cloven, and I've been a resident of Clayton for 14 years, since 2006. My wife, Lisa, and I have been married 20 years this November. We have 2 teenage daughters, Rochelle and Elena, who will be a senior and a freshman at Clayton Valley Charter High School this coming fall. Hopefully they'll be school. I love Clayton. I couldn't think of a better place to raise my kids. I mean, I've coached AYSO soccer for 10 years. I was a Dane Hills Otter swim parent for 10 years. I'm also an elder at the Presbyterian Church on Tucker Pass, which raises the rainbow flag as you drive by past Safeway. I love to give back to Clayton. And as such, I've been on the planning commission for the past 3 years, and the past year I've had the pleasure of serving as the planning chair. Professionally, I got a degree in biochemistry from UC Berkeley, go Bears, and I own a small business, an environmental consulting firm, which provides hazardous materials consulting for commercial industrial developers. And now we'll go off to Aaron. Lawrence, further.
Hey everyone, good evening. Lawrence Montgomery. Thank you all for joining. I have lived in Clayton for 5 years with my wife, Jasmine. She's an administrator at a junior high in Mount Diablo Unified School District. We also have 3 kids, a high schooler at Clayton Valley. We have that's our girl. Our 2 boys are in junior high and elementary school. Jasmine and I both grew up in Sacramento. Went to UC Davis undergrad. Lived in Denver for a number of years before moving to Clayton. We moved here because the schools were great, and we love the idea of a small community, and we've enjoyed our time here. Yeah, good to meet you all. And I'll pass to Kim.
Thanks, Lawrence. My name is Kim Newman, and I am a native Philadelphian. I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area about 25 years ago to make my fortune in tech. That didn't happen, but I met my husband, who is from Northern California. We moved to Clayton area about 7 years ago. We have 2 kids. We have a senior, he just graduated from De La Salle and is going to UC Berkeley, go Bears. And we have a going to be 8th grader at DVMS. We moved to Clayton because we really wanted a small community. I grew up in a rural part of Pennsylvania. My husband grew up in Santa Rosa before the wine. And we really wanted a place where our kids could ride their bikes to school and ride horses and do all of the things that we did as kids. And I'll pass it on to Matt.
Good evening. Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Tillman. I am to Holly. As many of you may know us around the community. We've been married for 20 years. We have 2 daughters. So Jordan, who's 16, she's going to be a junior at Northgate. And then Jada, who's 13, and she's going into her freshman year at Northgate. You may have also seen our daughter Jordan roaming around over at Ed's as she works there. We've lived in Clayton for almost 17 years now. Our girls have gone to KinderCare, which is now Clayton Children's Center, Mount Diablo Elementary, and Diablo View. Professionally, I got my undergrad degree from University of California, Los Angeles, in political science. Holly was also at UCLA with me. And I'm a president of an online marketing firm that specializes in online marketing for financial services companies nationwide. As a family, we've been very active in the community. And I'm gonna have to read this off because there's a lot that we've been doing over the years. But Holly was a PFC president for 2 years. She served as the vice president of education for 2 years. Site council member for 2 years. She helped with the reopening of Clayton Children's Center after being closed by KinderCare. She's a founding member of Stakeholders for Transparency, a member of the Mount Diablo Playfield Committee, which is the committee that ended up providing grass for Mount Diablo Elementary School. She's currently the secretary of the Clayton Business Community Association, so CBCA. And for the last 6 years, she's also been the team coordinator for the St. Bonaventure Track and Field program. I've coached many sports in town. So I've coached Clayton Valley Little League softball, all out sports basketball, St. Bonaventure basketball, actually with Michael. I've coached soccer. I've also been the head coach of the St. Bonaventure Track and Field program for the last 6 years. I'm also a member of the CBCA. I'm also on the board of a nonprofit organization in Antioch called Opportunity Junction, where I actually serve as a chairman of the marketing committee. And within my lead generation industry, also on a board of directors there, and very involved with race and diversity matters as it relates to the online marketing industry. So overall for me, I mean, for our family, moving to Clayton was really the best thing for us. I grew up in Foster City, very small town. The diversity factor is very similar to Clayton. So it was really what I was comfortable with and what I was accustomed to. Holly's from Barstow, California, so she wanted the heat, and we found small town with heat, and it was a perfect match. So here we are. And Michael.
All right, thanks, Matt. So my name is Michael Broom, and I'm gonna facilitate tonight's discussion. So I'm a married man of 19 years. My wife and I, Christine and I, have been here 13 years. We have 2 kids. Both kids are at Clayton Valley Charter High School. And I was born and raised in Oakland. And my wife and I found Clayton just by chance. And once we came here and we saw the wonderful people walking their kids in strollers, running, exercising, our next step was to find the nearest police officer. And the first guy we found told us that it was one of the most safest places that he's ever been exposed to. And the only problems he really deals with is when a neighbor's dog goes to the bathroom on their lawn. We were sold, okay? I work for a medical provider, and my job specifically, we manage custom software development, my team does, and we also manage software integration projects within our company, okay? So before we get started with the first question to the panelists and to the audience, I want to share a little story with you, just to give you just a sense of why we're here tonight, okay? My kids grew up in Clayton. They attended Mount Diablo Elementary School. They went to Diablo View Middle School. Like I mentioned, they're at Clayton Valley Charter today. When my son was in the 4th grade, he had an incident with another 4th grader. This other student called my son's friend a nigger when they're out on the playground. That hurt my son's friend's feelings. My son saw it, and as a result, he grabbed the other kid by the throat. My wife and I received a call from the principal and asked us to come to her office. So we went down there, and she wanted to suspend our son. And that was tough, right? Obviously, because of what had happened. It was also tough because we saw that as an opportunity for the principal to learn, for the school to learn, and for all 3 kids and the families to learn. But she saw it as an opportunity to suspend our kid, even though he reacted to something that was extremely terrible. Okay? And after a very frank conversation, the principal decided that it's better not to suspend either of the kid and to pretty much just push it under the carpet. To this day, I believe, my wife believes, we believe collectively that that was a lost opportunity for the community at large. And from that point on to this very day, conversations about race became a regular topic in our household. Okay? So keep that story in mind, and we're going to post our first poll question to the audience. First question is, how often do you talk to your friends, family, your kids about racial discrimination? And while you guys are answering this question, I want to present a question to the panel members. I want you to please share why this conversation is important to you. And let's start with Matt. Matt, please go ahead and start.
So this is obviously a very important conversation. And for me, it really goes back to early years for my kids. When my daughter, Jordan, was in first grade, and she was actually told that she was not able to play with another child because of the color of her skin. Jordan proceeded to come home and try to erase her skin. That same week, my daughter Jada was at daycare, and another child told her that she couldn't play with her because of the color of her skin. Jada was only 4. So you think about, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old being taught that there's something different. Like, they don't understand it, but yet it's a regular conversation that happens, especially amongst Black families. And it's almost as though people don't understand the impact of these actions. And it's really important that we all open up and have very direct and frank conversations so that everybody understands really what's going on. Most people had no idea that even was an issue in our household. But yet it turns into something that from those ages becomes a daily conversation about race, about differences, and understanding really how we're all the same. So, really that's why this is such an important topic. And, lastly, given just the makeup of our community, right? It's important to love, not hate. And so we need to make sure that our kids understand right from wrong and really how to live in society today.
So appreciate that, Matt. So Kim, can you also provide some context?
Sure. I think that one of the ways that we come together as a community is to show empathy for one another. And one of the things that was brought up earlier was the June 2nd incident in the community where some kids were shot with tear gas. And as awful as that was, it actually opened up a great thing for me and my fellow moms in the community. I call us the Mama Bears. Because they were able to experience something that I experience every day, which is the fear of allowing my kids to go downtown, the fear of allowing my kids to go off with their friends. And that helps bring us together. I think that having these conversations and listening to each other's stories is the only way we can create that bridge. And so I feel like this conversation is really important for all of us to have. I think every member of this panel has had an incident with a Black child where the N-word has been used in elementary school or younger. And so for all of you out in the audience that are saying we don't have this problem in Clayton, we obviously do. So we need to really bring it out into light and talk to each other about how we feel as a community.
Thank you, Kim. So Peter, we know that you started having these conversations with your kids. So can you chime in on that question about your conversations and when they started? So give the audience some context.
A little different, obviously. So I grew up in Orange County, which is pretty darn homogenous. And my dad graduated from Compton High School, so he had Black friends. And he taught us very young as a family that people are people. And you got to treat them with kindness and respect regardless of their race, their creed, or their sexual orientation. So, I mean, I was taught that. But I never really experienced prejudice at all until I got to Cal, and I had many gay friends. And I experienced the prejudice and the homophobia towards my gay friends. And I became an ardent supporter and fierce ally of the LGBTQ community. And that's why I was extremely proud of Clayton to finally recognize Pride Month this month in June. But that's not the only thing that happened this June. Obviously, that's why we're here. I've known the Tillmans for a decade now. I mean, Jada was in the same Girl Scout troop as my wife runs, and I coach soccer with Matt. We've had other Black friends, which I've known. We've had great friendships with them, and I really like them for who they are, but I never really got into a conversation about their being Black. I don't know why. I just love them for the people they were. So it wasn't something I ever thought about asking them. That all changed on June 2nd. My wife and my older daughter and I were at the Black Lives Matter demonstration on June 2nd, and I was standing with Howard, who is a big Black man, and his daughter, who I had coached with Howard AYSO soccer before, and his daughter's awesome. And I watched the anger and the pain in his face as the police moved in on the demonstrators and dispersed them with the smoke grenades and the tear gas. And he sat there and he whined about where's the city leadership? And it's like, oh my gosh, really, is this really happening in our town? So obviously, what happened on Friday, I brought my younger daughter back when we marched to the Grove, and what a different tone. And to see our friends, the Tillmans, up there with their kids, and 20 other people of color, Black families, telling their story, not about being Black, but of racism in our town that they experience in our town. And it's like, holy crap. I mean, this is not something that's far away. This is something that's being experienced by our friends. And I realized at that point, when we all walked away going, wow, this was an awesome experience of Friday, I didn't want that to meld into our memories. I wanted to keep the conversation going. And that's why I started searching for people to have this conversation tonight.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for sharing that emotion that you felt then. And I think, Lawrence, would you like to go next, please?
Yeah, I'll answer a bit of both of those. But the rally we had that Friday last month was really my first opportunity to speak on the idea of race. I don't know about many of you listening right now, but the topic of race is not discussed. It's almost as if we imagine all the years of systemic racism will just magically disappear. And we know that's not the case, right? We think about the education we have for our kids. They don't have an opportunity to talk about the Trail of Tears, things like the Civil Rights Act. They don't learn those things in school. When Clayton was established or incorporated even as a city in the 60s, the Federal Housing Administration was still very much redlining and not giving loans to Black people, right? And so it's no wonder, and even today, we have such a low percentage of Blacks and minorities in this community. And unless we're intentional about having these conversations, and frankly, intentional about being uncomfortable, even about the real history that we have, will never change it. And that's why I want to have these conversations. I want to speak out. I want to help educate. I want to learn myself so that we can move towards action and being more intentional about how do you make a community like Clayton, which is historically white, more diverse and more inclusive for all people.
Thanks, Lawrence. Aaron?
Sure. So, the more recent events have definitely opened up conversations for me and my family. We live here almost on our own, all of our families back in the Midwest. And, we have a wonderful, diverse group of friends that are like family to us. We've learned so much, especially recently, right? Just being more comfortable sitting around the table, talking about race. The stories that were shared with the community at the rally on June 5th. And I just want to continue those discussions and help others have these discussions, because they're not always easy. They're usually not easy. And so I just want to do everything I can to make this community a place where the families that I love will want to continue to call home. So, gosh, already, Brian and I are trying to raise, good humans to be, as good or better than we are. And these discussions help.
Thank you, Erin. All right, so we did present the first poll question. So the results of that. So just some quick numbers. how often do you talk to your children, friends, and family about racial discrimination? And almost half, so 44% said weekly, which I think is an awesome thing. 25% is around daily. And then there's a 6% that says never. Yearly is around 6% as well. And, we understand and appreciate that. And being able to discuss awareness is critical in the society in which we live in our country. So let's try to keep that conversation going. And so our next poll question is actually tied to that. Do you think talking about racism makes racism continues? And while we collect those numbers, someone in the audience presented a question around all lives matters, okay? All lives matters is often brought up when people hear Black Lives Matters and that movement. So I want to start with you, Kim. When you hear all lives matter, how does that make you feel? What does that make you feel, emotionally as well as just mentally? What does that make you want to say when you hear that?
Yeah, and if you know me, you know I have said this. There is no dispute that all lives matter. Every life matters. The issue right now is we are seeing that some people in our society's lives matter less, and that is not okay. So when I talk to people, I say the reason that you might be confronted with somebody who finds all lives matter offensive is because there's a specific group that we're talking about here, right? We're not disputing. I agree with you. Every life matters. I love everyone. But what we have here is an issue we need to call attention to, specifically about Black lives. And for all of my friends out there that are religious, I often talk about this as well. It's like, you couldn't go to Jesus and say all lives matter, right? Because what you would be confronted with is, yeah, true, all lives matter, but right now I'm focused on this particular group. This particular group needs my help the most. And so that's my response to the question of why not say all lives matter.
Great, thank you. Lawrence, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, Kim said that well. All lives matter, blue lives matter. I as a Black man, I support the police. I support all lives. That's not in question here. But it's often used as an excuse not to address systemic racism. And that's the problem, right? If you can't include Black lives in all lives, then you can't really say all lives. And I work in marketing and advertising, and a phrase that we'll use often is, you don't want to boil the ocean, because, right, you've all heard that. One of the things that's easy to do is, and I heard Aaron say this earlier, let good be the enemy of great. And so when you're thinking about changing systemic racism, when you're thinking about addressing the issues that have affected Black lives, and you throw everything into the pot, what happens is you never end up making any change, any progress. And so that's why it's offensive. That's why when you say all lives matter, you're actually impeding the discussion of really getting at why are Black people in communities like Clayton still 1%, right? Why do Black people in this community still feel uncomfortable? Why are we still using the N-word in elementary schools to this day? Where are the kids getting that from? And so it is not a question, as Kim said, to all lives. It's a question, are you willing to address the real issues that are facing Black people right now?
Thanks, Lawrence. So we presented the question around, do you think that talking about racism keeps the issue of racism alive? So we presented that poll question. Can I see the results real quick? So there they are. Okay. So that's good to see that 85% of us do not believe that talking about it keeps it going. And so when I see that, one, I'm encouraged as a African-American male here. But I also sense that we know that the reason why it's continuing, there's some systematic issues that we have to address as a society, right? So when I think of systematic issues, immediately the first thing that pops in my mind is the amount of African Americans, Black men being paraded on television, being arrested, and sometimes killed. Okay. And so when I think about that, I think about, you know, does this happen in the city of Clayton? So we do have a poll question around the percent of people or color of people that are pulled over by law enforcement here in Clayton. So, so the question is, you know, in Clayton, how likely are you to be, that's wrong, it's not the right one. That's not the right poll question. That's okay. But it's a police one, sorry, sweetheart. Is it? All right, question is, so Clayton, how likely are you to be reporting to the police as a suspicious person if you are Black? So right now, there's what, 1.1% of the population is Black versus 82% white. So how likely is a Black person to be reported as a suspicious individual? Okay, so I want to present this question to Matt. Matt, when you hear about police and Black men, what do you think? And what do you think some of our challenges are? And not necessarily from a Black man's perspective, but from a society perspective. What do you think some of our challenges are in order to correct this issue? Can you elaborate on kind of where I'm going with this? Does it make sense?
Sure. So for me, the whole issue amongst Black men and law enforcement goes back many, many years. And for me, I think about, you know, really that conversation that was had with my father, which I remember having. And to give some context, you know, my parents are from the South. My mother's from Selma, Alabama. My father from Birmingham. They lived through Jim Crow. They experienced everything. So for them, it was about getting out of the South and going to what they termed to be a better place. What I saw them doing was really trying to move away to environments that were predominantly white because that was perceived to be safer. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily the truth. The problem is that there's almost as though there's a fear of Black people, period. Just because we are Black, people have a different feeling when they see us. They naturally react differently. And interestingly enough, it could really be based on time of day. The morning and afternoon is fine. All of a sudden the sun goes down and there's a different mentality. There's a different treatment altogether. I see it in this town. It's unfortunate, but I do. And while as a family, we know so many people in town, oftentimes it's not until you recognize who I am that you treat me differently. But on the initial reaction, it's, here is a Black person in our town. So naturally, there's a defensive nature in Black men. There's a defensive nature within law enforcement. And the two just don't mesh together at all. So really part of this conversation is about how do you increase the comfort level of Black people in general?
I agree. I agree. So Peter, from your perspective, how would you help your Black friend get more comfortable, right? In an environment where when the police see us, there's immediate judgment that happens, fear, and a certain perspective prior to that engagement. So what are your thoughts or suggestions for us?
That's a really hard question, and I think it comes from a place of experience. As much as I've known Matt and Holly and their family in town, I got to say this is the first time Michael and Lawrence that I'm meeting you for the first time. And Kim, I've seen you at Dana Hills on the swim team, but I don't know you, so I haven't been with you when you're experiencing this town. The best I can do is being the best man I can for when I experience that, and teaching my family to react, not just be complacent, but when they experience that, to acknowledge that it's wrong and speak out against it. I can't make you more comfortable unless I'm with other people who are reacting that way and acknowledge it. That's the best I got for you. Sorry.
Oh, that's
Michael,
perfect. Go ahead, Matt.
Michael, I want to interject and say one thing.
Sure.
Peter, have you ever had a conversation with your kids about what to do if they are pulled over?
Never.
Right. That is a staple conversation in the Black community. Right? There are three responses. Yes, sir. No, sir. Thank you, sir. Right? The fact that that's a part of our life this is the reality.
And it's not a reality for me. And the fact that I actually heard you say that and actually feel it in Clayton. I mean, I would expect that someplace else. I didn't realize that it was here locally. And that's what shocked me so much about the conversations on the 5th. Sorry, I claim ignorance, because it really was. I was ignorant to it. Ignorant to your experience. I never asked you about it, Matt.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate your honesty, Peter. I mean, that's what we're asking for. So can we show the results of percent of people? All right. So our poll question, in Clayton, how likely are you to be reported to the police as a suspicious person if you are Black? And the results are, a Black person is 20 times more likely than a white person, and 89% of you agree. And to me, that's alarming, right? Because if we all know it, we need to change it, right? When women couldn't vote back in the early 1920s, in order for that to change, white men voted to make that change happen. And then during the civil rights, when all of these laws were put in place, it took white men and women to get behind that, to make that change. So to us, Black Americans, we're looking for our white brothers and sisters to support this movement to facilitate a change, all right? So now I want to go back to fear. Fear was brought up. And fear is a common thing, like Matt mentioned, that Kim has mentioned, where when we walk down the street or people approach a group of us, there's this inherent fear of us. And my next poll question is around, do you feel anxiety when a group of young down the street towards you? So while the audience is responding to that, this question I want to present to Aaron. How do you feel when you are walking down the street and you see a group of Black men? Either you're walking down the street or they're walking down the street and you see them ahead of you. How do you feel about that? What is that?
Sure. I think, back to how Matt described it earlier, a lot of it is time of day, right? If it's the middle of the afternoon and sunny and bright, I probably wouldn't think a thing of it. If it is, late at night on a dark street, am I going to react to a group of young men? Yes, definitely. I'm going to be aware. I'm going to make eye contact. I I am, I grew up in a very, very white community. I do think that I would naturally be more fearful if it was a group of young Black men. I would also be fearful if it's a group of young drunk men, right? Or a group of young white, loud, tattooed men. I'd be afraid of that as well. But I think that's a hard question to address. And completely honestly, I think that the answer is yes.
No, I appreciate that. So Kim, would you mind chiming in?
Yeah, a little bit of a different answer for me. I think when I see a group of young Black men, I go into mom mode, and I want to mother them and tell them to pull up their pants and act polite and use a big college word if you have one. And don't forget to videotape if you're stopped by the police. Those are the things that come to my mind. However, if I am around a group of very tattooed white men, I experience very similar feelings to what Erin is experiencing. I get anxiety. I went to a small rural college, and I have been chased by people before. I have been treated as property. And so my natural inclination is fear, if that's what I see approaching me.
I can appreciate that. So thank you. So Lawrence, Black man walking down the street, rural community, group of white guys. How do you feel?
Well, I'll give a couple of examples in my life. So I've never actually been arrested, never been charged with any crime, but I've been face down in handcuffs more than a couple times in my life. I grew up in South Sacramento, as I mentioned, and it was routine. You see a group of Black guys for the police to whatever their issue was, come around and question, and they do that by putting you in handcuffs, maybe putting you in the back of the police car, maybe putting you on the ground, and all those incidences thankfully ended peacefully. No one was hurt, but that I thought that was normal growing up as a teenager. I've had experiences here in Clayton, coming home from work and being followed by a neighbor all the way to my house and being questioned if I was the one that lived here when we first moved here. And it was a white mom in a white minivan. It was late at night. I'm sure she thought she was protecting her community, and someone looked out of place here. But it was profiling and it was racism. So my mind, like Kim, when I see a group of Black boys, I also feel compelled to want to educate and help. When at the rally, and I'll just be honest here, a few weeks ago, when you have a establishment like Canessa's, who has been openly, inflammatory with statements about race and other things, and you see a group of white guys standing there, and some even inciting, it's uncomfortable. It's disappointing, and I wouldn't want my kids, my friends, anyone I know around that type of environment. And it's intended to do exactly what it's doing, and it's bullying, and it's trying to make people of color not want to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, well said, all of you. Thank you for that. So anxiety when there's a group of Black kids walking down the street towards you. Sometimes 63%, and I think that's consistent with what our panelists just mentioned, right? It just depends. So thank you very, very much for that.
Can I interject something real fast,
Absolutely.
Michael?
Absolutely.
Because we had this exact question around the dinner table with some friends, and we were hemming and hawing about whether we're more anxious or not. I think the difference for me is that if I'm anxious or I feel threatened, I am completely comfortable calling the police. Completely comfortable calling the police. And I mean, I wouldn't think a thing about it. And, you know, our friends at the table, it was really eye-opening for me when he was like, it doesn't matter what color the group is. What matters to him is that he doesn't feel safe calling the police.
That's interesting. That's interesting. All right. Well, thank you for that. So I kind of want to change gears a little bit. And I want to talk about a tool, tools to provide our audience. One of the challenges I think people have with approaching Black people about race is fear of offending, not using the correct words. And one of our goals tonight is to help people with that, okay? So I want to get a volunteer from the panel. Peter's up. What tools can we, or suggestions can we offer to the audience on how to bring up race to their Black friend?
You know, I have, I want to bring it up because you kind of stirred something in me. I haven't had a difficult time bringing up race with my friends who are Black because I didn't think it was appropriate. I just accepted them for who they are. So it causes very awkward conversation. And I don't even know as a white man what you want to be called. I mean, honestly, are you Black? Are you African American? Are you person of color? Those, I mean, that simple question, which sounds really absurd. I mean, I'm almost embarrassed to ask it. And I would, that type of help would be, how can I ask that to you? I mean, it sounds ridiculous to ask that, but that's what I really need. I need that type of assistance because I think I'm pretty stereotypical of a lot of people out there who are afraid to ask those questions. So those tools would be very helpful. Thank you.
Hey, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah. So the question is really the basis for our entire conversation tonight, because it's really about, we need to all open up and have the difficult conversation. Nothing good is ever going to come from not talking about what the problems are at hand, or not necessarily problems, but even just general questions. So we all talked about this in terms of, I'm talking about the panelists, in terms of what do Black people prefer to be called? And I'm saying Black right now just because I prefer Black. But everybody else, everyone is going to have a different opinion about that, right? So individually, you need to have that conversation with your Black friend and ask your Black friend, what do they like to be called? Some want to be called a person of color. Others want to be called, anything else. I mean, it's just, it gets to a point where you really have to have the difficult conversation. And this is not an easy conversation to have. I mean, I've enjoyed my time here in Clayton because I felt like I just kind of blend in with everyone else. But it really wasn't until the recent events that took place nationally that I realized, look, every person has an opinion about what's going on. Now, I need to understand, what side of the opinion are you on? Are you on my side or are you on another side? Because if you're on the other side, it's going to be very uncomfortable for a very long time, right? So we're here tonight to have this conversation. And my goal from tonight would be for everybody to leave this and feel free, feel open. If you see me, my wife, anybody here on the panel, any of us, and you want to ask a question, please. I would have a problem if you don't ask me the question. I really would.
Thank you, Matt. Kim, so we've had this conversation like Matt has mentioned, and just depending on our upbringing, you know, Black versus African-American, is our comfort level. So can you give the audience just a perspective on your thoughts on what people should refer to you as?
Yeah, people should refer to me as Black. I am Black. I often say I'm blackity black, black, black. That's what I am. I was raised by folks that were pretty militant My uncle was an ex-Black Panther. And so Black was a love term when I was growing up in my house. And it was also a factor of African American is for people who can trace back to Africa. I don't really know where we're from. We're kind of from America. Quite frankly. And I wouldn't call my husband a European American. So I would call him white. But as Matt said the other day, he has that lovely term Caucasian that we can also call him. For Black, it's just Black. And so that's how I prefer to be called.
Appreciate that. So good. So audience.
Hey, Michael, one thing, there's a question that came up that I just think we should address, because I think there's a question out there around what happens when you're around a group of people and you need to address it a certain way, right? Do you call all people Black? Do you call them all African American? Because you're not going to have necessarily, individual conversations with everyone in the group to then figure out what's the right way to address it, right? I would really encourage everyone to have just a general conversation then. And I feel like the person that may have asked this question is a school teacher because they referred to To Kill a Mockingbird. I think what you need to do in going into that sort of conversation is gain consensus amongst the audience around how you're going to talk about this. And it needs to really open up with a conversation of, we are going to have a difficult conversation about race. Let's understand what terms we're going to use, because we've just talked about 3. You all know that there are more than 3 terms, Black, African American, and people of color, right? And when you're reading some of the books from way back then, it's going to use the N-word quite frequently. So I would recommend not using the N-word around them. But my point is that I think you need to have a general conversation about how you're going to actually address this, and then discuss it openly.
All right, thanks, Matt. So that leads us to our next poll question. When you're speaking to a Black friend of yours and they are not present, how do you refer to them, right? I think this will give, the greater audience just an understanding of how inconsistent or how consistent we are as a community. So if you can, answer those questions while we start to pivot into another area, that'd be great. Next question. Great, just getting good results. So 78, 74, or 81% refer to their Black friends as Black, and only 13% as African American. So it's good to know. And ironically, I think that's consistent with this panel and in our entire group when we were talking about what do you prefer to be called or referenced as. So I want to pivot now. I want to pivot to how would you recommend to a friend, to a family member who, let's say, they don't believe that bias exists in their community or in our community, how do you get them involved in the conversation? So Erin, I want to start with you.
I was hoping to get some tidbits from everyone else. I think that that conversation is super hard because the people that you see saying these things may more often be people that you're related to, or that live in different countries and you don't even interact with constantly. You may see them on social media. And so, personally, I myself have started being a little more forward, if you will, on and standing up a little more on social media posts. My in-person experience has been very different. I haven't seen or experienced as much of that overt racism, if you will, that people might say. So I'm hoping to get some tidbits from everyone else on the panel.
All right, great. Hey, Lawrence, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I would say that the most important thing we all can do is believe others' experiences as they tell them. In this conversation about race, it is so fraught with missteps and opportunities to put your foot in your mouth. If any of you saw me speak that Friday night, you know, I have no problem putting my foot in my mouth. But it is crucial that as we approach these discussions, that we're open and empathetic to the people around us and believe what they say, because that's where the conversation starts. And for me, you know, you can call me Black, African American. That's not what's ultimately important. What's truly important is that we engage in this discussion. If anything comes from this moment we've been in as a society for the last, you know, month or so, 6 weeks, I hope it's that we're releasing the stigma around the discussion of race. What's no longer acceptable is to ignore this conversation and not engage. I would say any of your Black friends are going to give you a bit of leeway and space to make missteps, to say the wrong thing, if you're genuinely trying to learn and make things better. And that's what I would tell all people. As we lean into this, don't be afraid to say the wrong thing. Be afraid that you're not speaking up enough. Be afraid that you're not being open enough. Be afraid that you're not being empathetic enough to people.
Awesome. Thank you, Lawrence. So Kim, we saw that you responded to the question around children are taught to be colorblind. Do you want to elaborate on your thoughts around that? For the
Yeah,
audience?
so in my house, we try to raise folks that are using positive statements. So what I like to say to my white friends when they say, I don't see color is, no, we see all colors. Let's turn the negative into a positive, because by saying you see no color, you're negating the experiences that I've had as a result of my color, which I don't think any of us on the phone doubt actually exists, right? So let's not pretend like they don't exist. Let's instead actually acknowledge they exist and have empathy for each other and our experiences and our stories. Let's appreciate all colors instead of saying no colors. So that was the answer that I was giving in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you. So when we saw what happened to George Floyd here a few months ago, we heard people in the background who were filming this horrible event and act had their cameras out, filming, voicing their frustration, and truly couldn't do anything about it because that was, you know, people in law enforcement with weapons. And unfortunately, they killed George Floyd. When I think about that event and I think what I would have done in that situation, I don't know if I would have done anything different. So general question to the panel, if you are in a situation and you see something that is racially driven, whether it's at work or law enforcement has pulled over someone, or you're shopping at a store and you see security following a Black person who's just shopping, what would you do or tell your friends to do to address that unfortunate activity? So this question, I'm going to point it to my friend Matt.
So if you had asked me this question 3+ months ago, I probably would have said, I'm going to continue on doing what I'm doing because it doesn't involve me. After what we've gone through as a society, there is no way I can just walk away. Something must be said or done. The number of times that I watched the George Floyd situation and said, what if someone would have tried to push the officer off? What if he could have had one last breath? I just wish someone would have done something, anything. Now, at this point, I think most Black people are going to react very differently today than what they would have done before, especially when we feel as though we have a society that has all of these situations now under a microscope, and there can actually be something done about it. Prior to this, I don't think anybody felt that there would be any remedy by doing anything. At this point, there's a lot that can.
Yeah. Who wants to go next? Peter.
I think what I've learned this past month, it's not enough just to be not racist. It's not enough to just act with kind respect. It's time to change to be anti-racist, and it's a different mindset for me than I've been before. And recognizing that and being more vigilant, for lack of a better term, for when I see it and acknowledge it, and to make a difference against it, and that I hadn't been that way before. That's just kind of where I'm coming from now.
Okay. Lawrence, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think it's important to state that you can both be for Black lives and for blue lives, right? It's not a dichotomy. It's not a one or the other. Granted, I think, you know, what we are realizing as a society is maybe the way we've done policing as a whole can be improved, right? We send guns to solve mental health issues. We send guns to solve issues that we're having in the education system. There's a better way to do that, right? That doesn't mean that, you know, abolish the police and that means they all go away. It means, like everything else, it can no longer be in our community, in our nation, that if you speak up to change and improve things, that means you're anti or against it. Let's end that kind of thinking. We can make progress together as we understand how we can make improvements. And so that's really where I'm interested in leaning in. And I think, you know, as a community, as we think about even Clayton right now, where are the places where we can make improvements, right? We've inherited this world, this community that was established many years ago, right? Are there things there that don't work for us anymore? Are there things there that we can make better and improve, to make more people feel inclusive? And you know, as I said at the rally, I truly believe the idea of diversity, right? We have great festivals downtown Clayton, great moments of meeting and gathering, obviously not this year, but traditionally. How can we make those even more inclusive, right? How can we make this community, the houses, the people here even more diverse? And that's I think what our opportunity is. And I think that's what history will look back at this moment and say, okay, that was a moment. Did things stay the same? Was it just a blip on the graph that spiked in June of 2020 because everyone was stuck at home? Or did we actually use it to say, wow, Clayton is a more inclusive place than it was in 2020 because of the changes that were made?
Awesome. So Kim, go ahead and chime in, and then I have a follow-up question to that. Yes.
I also want to say that I think it's really important for you all of us, to have the conversations that are important. So when people are coming to protect our town, what exactly does that mean? How does that affect people where we know systemic racism exists? My son has been, who was just a curly-headed, cute boy to all of y'all when he was 9, became 12 and got pulled over by the police. So how do we keep what was going on when he was 9 go on when he's 12 and 17 and 21? How do we really change the conversation? I think That's really important, and I'm glad that everyone has joined us in order to talk about that.
Thank you. So this question or request is for the attendees. Can you post in chat what you think that we can do as the community to affect this change, right? Because you heard Lawrence and Kim talk about not just this being a flashpoint, but we have an opportunity now to evoke change in our community, in our society. And we can start with Clayton, we start with our families, we'll start with our network. And as we start to make change, that ripple effect will go to the wider group. I wanted to make sure we look at the results of this poll question. You know, have you stood up for someone who was getting rude comments about their race? And I'm very encouraged for this. And 80% said, yes, it's very important to stand up, and they have stood up for someone. And I think that's great. I mean, I think as a human, we want to stick up for people who are being bullied and treated unfairly. So I think that's a wonderful thing. I actually want to go back to one thing around change. There was a question earlier that was in the chat room around around how do you get people that are in a position of authority to make changes, right? I think that's a very broad question, but we work in different industries. So if you take a moment, think about how can we get other people who are in leadership positions to make change. So for instance, how do we get someone in financing to truly stop redlining, right? How do we get medical providers to, instead of saying, I don't want to provide medical support for low income families and communities because I get 80 cents on the dollar versus 100 cents on the dollar in a middle class or upper class community. So who would like to chime in on how do we get people in a position of authority to make change? Who wants to chime in? It's a long conversation, and it may lead to our next discussion, big discussion, but I just want to get some thoughts around that. Put your hand up if you want to go. Erin?
I think the obvious answer to me is we have to vote, right? We have to vote, and of course the big presidential elections are super important, but even more for us maybe local elections and being involved in the community and choosing people that can answer the hard questions about race and how they feel, and that have a history of, you know, being at least not racist.
Awesome. Absolutely.
Michael,
Go ahead, Matt.
I think in addition to voting, I mean, again, I think we're taking the steps needed to start the conversations, right? Because we need to all understand what everyone's positions are on various topics. So these conversations are only going to lead to educated and informed decisions that ultimately will help the masses. Absolutely.
We get some good ideas online from the chat, from the audience. So just want to let the audience know we are recording this, so we will be able to capture all the questions, and that will help form our next discussion. So money and votes. All right, so different question. So we talked about standing up, and we have another one I wanted to talk about. Wow, all my questions have been answered. That's amazing. We have what? We have about 17 minutes left, 18 minutes left. When I think of my day-to-day challenges as an adult male, part of my challenges are in my workforce, right? And I think the work environment is a big challenge. And I know this is probably a topic that's going to take hours to talk about, but I want to bring them up. I remember when I started out in tech, and like Kim, Even though I didn't move to the Bay Area, I'm from the Bay Area, I did focus on Silicon Valley, and I was at a wonderful position where I was able to drive about $400 million over a 2-year period for one of my products. And ironically, I didn't get promoted. $400 million for a company that's bringing in 1.7 billion, to me was a slap to my face, okay? The problem was I didn't do anything about it. I got frustrated and eventually I left, okay? And I think that's common when we feel helpless, right? So again, I'm looking for tools. So can someone chime in and provide some direction on how a person, a Black person, if they're in a situation where they're not being treated fairly, say at work, how do they go about changing that without leaving their job? Because they still have bills to pay. They probably like their job outside of that one situation or that one person. So any suggestions to the audience on how people can help and what people can do if they are the ones being discriminated against? And then if you're in a position where it's your friend, even though they're a coworker, any suggestions on how to address that situation?
I keep going back to the same, point, in that all of this requires a conversation. Right? We are here right now to talk about problems. Same thing should be addressed in the workplace. Oftentimes, it's not known that there's an issue in the workplace. Right? I think for a number of us, the notion of HR is a bad thing. Right? But I think you need to be able to leverage those resources that are around you to voice the discontent, to be able to address the problem. And that problem could be a problem that many others are having as well. But I think it really starts with having an open conversation, or else nothing ever gets solved and the problem just continues.
But is there a concern around retaliation? I mean, for instance, when I told the story about what happened to my son, one of our fears was, that the principal and the teacher would retaliate against him if we pushed it further, right? So there's always that in the background, right? And so how do you handle that as well, right?
Yeah, so I think retaliation is going to come with anything. You have to start by voicing the problem and addressing the problem head on. And you have to deal with whatever the ramifications are of the problem in order to make sure that eventually it gets solved.
Okay, all right. Lawrence?
Yeah, I'll just add, because I'll agree with all that's been said. And I would say a couple things. One is find your allies, truly, right? There are different types of people in this world, people that understand some of the difficulties that you have to go through as a minority and others that don't. Find the ones that do understand, especially in the workplace setting. I was mentored as a young Black man, and very quickly came to understand my #1 job in corporate America, before I can do anything else, and that's make white people comfortable. I'm a 6'2" Black man. I cannot sit in a room with 10+ white people unless I'm able to make them comfortable with my body. And I do a number of things in the corporate setting to do that. I remember getting asked, I've been at my current job for 10 years, and I often wear a tie and a sports coat, even when it's a more casual setting. And I've been asked why, and I never tell people the true answer. The true answer is I'm trying to make white people comfortable. And that's what I have to do. And so There are all sorts of things that as a Black man, I'm sure as a Black woman as well, you have to think about ahead of, in addition to the actual task of doing your job. And what I found in the workplace is there are people that get that, people around you that get that. And when you're going through some of those moments where you're struggling, it's hard to speak up. It's hard to go right to HR and make it an issue. But when there are people that understand that dynamic of race and what's happening in the workplace, you can confide in them and lean on them, and use them to also help tell your story.
But is it really our responsibility to make others comfortable? And this is a question that I need to ask, because there are some that believe Black people do not owe it to white people to make them comfortable. It's up to them to be confident when they see us, to just be themselves and accept that we are Black, and some of us are bigger than them. I mean, it's just human, right? Some people are bigger, some people are smaller. Why is it our responsibility to make them comfortable? So this is a question I want to present. Why is it our responsibility?
You're stoking the fire, Michael, and I like that. And you're right, it's not. But I tell my kids the same thing. Just because it's not your responsibility doesn't mean you don't have to do it. And when you're walking into corporate America as a Black person in this country, you cannot do your job unless you're doing certain things. And so it's crucially important that we're able to understand that dynamic, because you can sit there and fight that battle as an individual all day long, and you've seen people that have, and it becomes exponentially harder to keep that job, to stay in that place, to actually move up. And so I often say, I mean, it's much easier to affect change from the inside than the outside. And so, yes, you're right. It's not your responsibility, but that doesn't mean you don't have to do it.
Absolutely agree with you. All right, so thank you for that. And I am going to stoke the fire. That's what I'm supposed to do.
I was going to say, I would bring it back to the discussion. So, I mean, the whole reason we're having this discussion is the same thing in the workplace, right? This is where I spend time when I'm not in work. I want to feel comfortable here. I want you to feel comfortable. I want to be in a community where we like and appreciate the things that we have, which are good schools and great weather and all of these wonderful places for our kids to go and be. So I think that you got to do it in all places, unfortunately, if you want that place to feel comfortable for you. So whether that's work or home, whatever it is, it may not be our responsibility, but I feel like it almost is my responsibility, because this is where I want to be comfortable. So that's my answer.
Awesome. Erin?
I think that for me, these conversations just make me more aware of the situations and the racism and the discrimination that you guys have been exposed to. So as an ally in the workplace or in the community or in a store, you know, watching the loss prevention follow someone, these conversations just make me more aware of what I should be looking for in the community and in the workplace.
Excellent. Anyone else want to chime in? I think this is a great topic. Yeah? No?
And I think not walking in your shoes, there's no way I can understand what the conversation you guys are having right now. So I'm going to agree with Erin. Just hearing what you guys are saying right now is an eye-opening experience, and I'm sure the attendees of this panel, it's more of what we needed to hear to understand where you are and help gild where we're going to go.
Thank you, Peter. All right, can you bring up the poll results? Okay. All right, so we have about 8 minutes left. My next question actually is about going forward. And this is for the audience. Do you want to continue these conversations with additional webinars on this topic, around this topic of racism in our community? Please vote so we can basically get your support, or we make this our last one. I believe people want to continue this conversation and we'll evolve that topic. 7 minutes left.
And Michael, let me say one thing. I think, you know, when we all came together and decided it was important for us to have this conversation, it was really on the heels of some of the darkest days in this town, right? I know I was not out there on the 2nd with my family. I did watch the video footage. It was disheartening. It hurt. There was no way I was going to miss the 5th. And there was no way that many other people in the community were going to miss the 5th. And they didn't. And everybody showed up in full support. It was peaceful. And we started the conversation. The way that I see it going forward is that it can't just be a one-time event. This has to be an ongoing conversation so we can get out of this title or the stigma of the town of Clayton being a racist town.
Agreed.
This is an uncomfortable conversation, but it's important that we have it. And in order to get away from this notion of Clayton being a racist town, we need to all come together and make sure that it is not viewed that way based on the actions of the community. I've seen that there are a lot of great ideas in the panel or in the chat room. These are things that we need to take action on. And as a community, we need to come together to do that. I think that there's tremendous support here from not only those that are on the panel, but everybody in the community of doing the right thing. Like that's one of the themes of the city, right?
Yep.
Do the right thing. Well, this is the right thing.
Yep.
And this is why we're all here.
Agreed.
Now, you know, we've all gone, you know, a big way, a bit, you know, out of our way here to be here and talk about this. It's not an easy conversation to have, but yet the only way that I see that this was a success is if we can continue having the conversation going forward.
Agreed. Kim, you want to get some final thought in?
You know, just 100% to Matt Tillman. I completely agree. As I said, I just don't think that we can come together without learning about each other and understanding where the other person is coming from. And if we want to treat each other like family and we really want to be a Clayton community family, then we need to start having those really difficult conversations. We need to continue to have really difficult conversations and not be afraid to have them and not be afraid to actually affect change. You know, in addition to voting, I think you can also vote with your dollars. And I know that my family does that quite often. So I encourage all of you in Clayton to do the same. If we don't want to be perceived as a racist town, then perhaps we should stop frequenting one, frequenting a racist business in our town. So that's how I will leave it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think that this is really important, and I think we should continue.
Thank you. Peter?
Now,
Final thoughts?
This whole dialogue has just been awesome. For those of you out there in the attendees, I pretty much only knew Matt before this conversation. I've gotten to know Kim and Michael and Lawrence and Aaron through this conversation. It's been a great experience. More than anything, what I would like this to create is dialogue with our children, and this to be available to teachers and other parents who weren't there to experience on Friday night what we experienced, and not to let that love-in die. I mean, we need to keep this conversation going. So recording it and showing it to those who weren't here tonight even, this is the conversation that you keep going. And I would love to see a panel with just kids having the same conversation if we can find it. I think that they're the ones who need to hear this. I mean, honestly, that's how we make change.
Aaron?
I mean, I agree with all of the above, right? We definitely vote, if you will, with our dollars. My kids make fun of me all the time about my long boycott list of the places I will and will not frequent. I will say I personally, you know, similar to to Peter. I didn't know a lot of people on the panel coming in here, and even, you know, as we were talking through some of our questions, it's been very, very eye-opening having these conversations. And I think some of the biggest movement I've even seen within myself are the conversations we have around the dinner table with our friends and family. So, you know, if you're at the community table at Moressi's or whatever with a group that you may or may not know, these conversations really move the needle. And so, yes, we can do big things with multicultural festivals and murals, but I really think the change starts with us having these conversations with our friends and family in small groups.
Thank you. And Lawrence.
Man, I just want to thank you guys. This panel, the people that you can't see that are helping to facilitate this, I was truly encouraged at the rally that Friday in June. I honestly didn't know that you cared. I mean, to sit here and have, you know, 130 plus people, participants listening in is encouraging, and it means that we can start with a conversation and that leads to action. You know, Clayton is currently, as we've all talked about, a historically white town, and we can make it better. We can improve that. It doesn't have to have a reputation that we don't want. We can have a more inclusive reputation. You know, what if we made this town an example of how you turn into an inclusive town, right? Where unlike a town in the Midwest, Iowa, where there are no minorities around, we are surrounded by minorities. And there is every opportunity to let them know that they're welcome here. And we know the reason they're not here is not just economics. Right. So I'm encouraged by this conversation. Oh, so welcome having more of these and hearing more stories and listening, and leaning in and turning this into action as one of the next steps.
Awesome. So I personally want to thank all of you, all the panelists. 98% of the people that voted said they want to continue this conversation with more and different topics. So we're going to do this, more conversations. So it's going to happen. So again, I want to thank Aaron, Peter, Kim, Lawrence, Matt. You're our panelists, but behind the scenes, Christine, Terry, Holly, Scott, Julie, Tui, CW, Steve, Chris. I can't remember the other. I'm missing someone. Am I missing someone? Did I get everybody? And I also want to thank you, the audience. We know this is a tough conversation, but we believe in our hearts that if we, as a community, we have a great community. Majority of folks are really, really good people, great people. If we can just keep spreading the love and spreading the word, we can affect change, right? We're very smart individuals, very smart. So if we drive that and we teach our kids, I think we're going to continue to make Clayton a wonderful place to live. And with that, I want to say good night and thank you for your time. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.